She thought she was the queen because she claimed to be my husband's wife. When she threw an obscenely expensive glass of wine in my face, I didn't get angry. I just smiled coldly and called the real owner of the restaurant, my husband himself, to clean up the mess his new wife had made. The air inside the 45th floor boardroom felt significantly colder than the temperature displayed on the thermostat. It wasn't because the Manhattan skyscraper's AC was working too hard. It was the silence I had created. I sat at the head of a long, polished black mahogany table, staring dead center at the new marketing director. He had just finished his presentation. His face was pale, cold sweat glistening at his temples. He was waiting for my reaction. So were the 10 other board members, all holding their breath. They knew who I was. They knew that in this building and this holding company that oversaw dozens of ultra-fine dining restaurants and commercial real estate properties across the East Coast, I was the law. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence hang, slowly choking the confidence out of them. My perfectly manicured hand, bare of any flashy wedding ring, turned the pages of the proposal he had just distributed. I read every line, every number, every foolish assumption with a speed that made them squirm. My eyes stopped on page 12, the estimated return on investment, a joke. With a slow, deliberate motion, I closed the thick folder. The sound echoed sharply in the dead quiet room. I looked the poor man right in the eye. I didn't need to yell. The person in control never needs to raise their voice. I asked him if he had actually graduated from Wharton, or if he had forged his degree because the numbers he had just presented were an insult to the intelligence of everyone in the room. Without looking at my notes, I meticulously explained why the 5% growth projection he promised for the second quarter was impossible under current market conditions, unless, of course, he intended to commit money laundering. I dismantled his arguments one by one, tearing down the foundation of a presentation he had likely spent weeks preparing in less than 5 minutes. There was no emotion in my voice, only sharp, painful facts. The man stuttered, trying to mount a defense, but I raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. I told him to get out, revise everything tonight, or have his resignation letter on my desk by tomorrow morning. He nodded rapidly, gathered his things with shaking hands, and practically sprinted out of the room like he had seen a ghost. The other board members kept their heads down, pretending to be fascinated by their iPads, terrified of being the next target. The meeting was adjourned. I stood up, smoothed out my flawlessly tailored black blazer, and walked out without looking back. My personal secretary, an intensely efficient woman in her 50s named Rachel, was already waiting outside with a tablet displaying my schedule. She walked beside me toward my corner office, a space where I could watch the entire city grid of New York sprawling beneath my feet. This was my world, a world where emotion was a weakness and logic was king. Inside, I sat in my plush leather chair. On the left wall hung a massive abstract painting that cost enough to buy a McMansion in the New Jersey suburbs. Opposite it was a framed photograph of my wedding. In that picture, we looked like the happiest couple on earth. My husband with his charming movie star smile that could melt any woman's heart, and me smiling faintly beside him. Outsiders saw that photo as a symbol of ultimate success, the union of two powerhouses, but to me it was nothing more than a business contract framed in gold. I let out a long sigh, massaging my slightly throbbing temples. Being the brains behind this empire was exhausting, especially when your husband functions more as a mascot than a partner. Arthur did have charm. He was an incredibly smooth talker, a social butterfly, and his face sold very well in luxury lifestyle magazines. That was exactly why I let him hold the title of CEO. He was the one who stood in front of the cameras. He cut the ribbons and shook hands with investors, but everyone on this floor knew the final decisions rested with me. I held 60% of the company's shares. Legally and technically, I was my own husband's boss. Rachel placed a stack of monthly reports from our various restaurant branches on my desk. I asked her for a black coffee, no sugar, before she left. My eyes began to scan the financials of our flagship property, the Gilded Swan. It was a Michelin-starred jewel in our corporate crown, located in a historic Tribeca brownstone, a place where politicians, Wall Street titans, and A-listers dropped thousands of dollars on microscopic portions of food. Usually its reports were immaculate, But today something bothered me. My 20 years of business instinct never missed. There was an unnatural pattern in the operational expenses column, a significant spike in entertainment costs, and imported ingredients that didn't correlate with this month's sales volume. I grabbed a calculator and reran the percentages. For a company our size, the discrepancy wasn't massive, maybe the cost of 1 or 2 luxury cars, but to me, a single dollar spent without clear justification was theft. I dug into the digitized receipts, excessive purchases of vintage wine orders for imported roses, every 2 days overtime, pay for a specific staff member whose name had only appeared on the payroll 2 months ago. Briana, job title, junior server. Since when did a junior server make overtime equivalent to a floor manager's salary? And since when did a restaurant need to order custom imported roses, delivered not to the restaurant, but to a luxury high-rise apartment in Midtown Manhattan, a property I knew for a fact was one of Arthur's private investments? A cynical smile formed on my lips. So this is it. The old game played anew. Arthur and I had a very specific arrangement. We didn't marry out of burning passion, but out of shared ambition. Over time as love, if it ever truly existed, faded into routine, we struck an unspoken deal. He was allowed to have his fun. He could play with the young women who were dazzled by his charisma and his wealth, as long as he obeyed 2 cardinal rules. 1, never embarrass me in public. 2, never mess with the business or the company's finances. For years, he had been smart enough to cover his tracks. He knew I didn't care as long as he came home on time for important social events and didn't bring back a disease. But this time, he had gotten sloppy. He had started mixing his personal pleasure with my business operations, letting his mistress onto the payroll with an absurd salary and using the restaurant's budget for romantic gifts was a gross violation of our treaty. This was no longer about infidelity. This was embezzlement. And to me, touching company money was a sin far greater than breaking wedding vows. I slammed the report shut. Anger began to spread through my chest. Not out of jealousy, absolutely not. My heart had frozen over long ago. I couldn't care less about the parade of foolish girls in my husband's life. I was angry because he had underestimated my intelligence. He thought I wouldn't check the details. He thought because I rarely visited the restaurants in person, I wouldn't know what was happening on the floor. I spun my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows. The late afternoon sky was turning a hazy orange over the Hudson River. The city looked so chaotic from up here, just like my marriage. I picked up my phone, debating whether to call him right now and scream at his stupidity. But no, that was too easy, too inelegant. If I confronted him directly, he would deny it, make 1,000 excuses, and just hide his little rat somewhere else. I needed a better strategy. I needed to see for myself how much damage he had done to my proudest restaurant. I needed to know who this Briana was and exactly how much influence she had over my husband that he dared to mess with my balance sheets. My mind drifted to the past, to the days when I built this business from the ground up, working 18-hour days, sacrificing my youth, my social life, just to lay the bricks of this empire. Arthur came later bringing connections and a handsome face. But I poured the concrete. No one not my husband, and certainly not his little plaything, was going to ruin what I had built with blood and sweat. Rachel walked in with my coffee. I took a sip, letting the bitter, scalding liquid wake up my senses. The plan was forming. Tomorrow, I wouldn't come to the office. Tomorrow, I would conduct a surprise inspection, not as the majority shareholder arriving in a chauffeured Maybach with an entourage, but as a regular customer. I wanted to see the true face of the restaurant service without the fake masks they wore when the big boss was in town. I wanted to see exactly what kind of investment my husband was nurturing down there. And if it turned out this woman was hurting my business, I wouldn't just remove her. I would make sure she regretted ever touching what was mine. I looked back at the wedding photo on the wall. Arthur's smile looked more punchable than ever. "Enjoy it while you can, darling," I murmured to the glass frame. "Because you're about to learn that on this chessboard the queen is the deadliest piece and the king can barely move." I cleared my desk. That was enough for today. I needed to go home, rest, and prepare for tomorrow's performance, because tomorrow the queen was stepping down from her throne to take out the trash. My black sedan glided smoothly through the towering wrought iron gates, cutting through a sprawling lawn manicured with military precision. Not a single weed dared to grow in my Greenwich, Connecticut estate, just as no mistakes were tolerated in my life. My private driver opened the door, and I stepped out into the crisp, quiet evening air. Our home was a modern architectural marvel, dominated by concrete glass and steel. Beautiful, grand, and exorbitantly expensive, but entirely devoid of warmth. It wasn't a home. It was a museum where two strangers coexisted under one roof. I stepped into the vast foyer. The imported Italian marble floors reflected my silhouette. A housekeeper hurried over to take my briefcase and offer a drink. I declined politely and asked, "Is Mr. Arthur home?" She replied that he was already in the dining room. I nodded and headed up the stairs to freshen up before facing the second act of my day, playing the perfect wife. In a master bathroom the size of a standard Manhattan studio, I splashed cold water on my tired face. I stared at my reflection. At 45, I was in prime condition. My skin was taut thanks to a rigorous, expensive skincare regimen. My eyes were sharp, radiating intelligence, and my posture was impeccable. I was just as beautiful as the young girls out there. My beauty was just the intimidating kind, not the inviting kind. I swapped my corporate armor for a comfortable yet elegant silk loungewear set. In this house, even casual wear had to scream old money. I went down to the dining room. Arthur was sitting at the far end of a table that could easily seat 12. He was glued to his iPhone, smiling to himself as he read a text. The moment he noticed me, the smile vanished, replaced instantly by a practiced, polite expression. He placed the phone face down on the table, the classic move of a man hiding something. We ate in a silence, broken only by the clinking of heavy silver on porcelain. Dinner tonight was a dry-aged Wagyu ribeye with roasted asparagus cooked to perfection by our private chef. It was delicious, but my appetite had died the moment I saw those financial reports. I cut my meat into tiny pieces, chewing slowly as I observed the man across from me. He looked restless. His suit jacket was off, his top button undone, revealing a glimpse of his broad chest. He was handsome, I'll admit. The distinguished gray at his temples only added to his gravitas. It was no wonder a young girl like Briana was obsessed with him. But to me, he was a book I had read too many times, predictable and boring. Finally, he broke the silence. He cleared his throat gently and asked, "How was your day at the office?" I gave a standard brief answer, noting that everything was under control and quarterly profits were stable. I deliberately omitted my discovery. I wanted to see if he had the nerve to bring it up himself. Sure enough, after some empty banter about the weather and distant holiday plans, he pivoted to his actual agenda, keeping his tone as casual as possible. He mentioned that he was thinking about restructuring the compensation for some key staff at the Gilded Swan. He argued that the culinary industry was getting fiercely competitive in New York, and we needed to provide better incentives so our talent wouldn't be poached by rivals. My left eyebrow twitched upward. A mathematically sound argument in theory, but I knew exactly where this was going. I asked him which department he meant. He looked slightly nervous, swirling his wine glass. He named a few managerial roles, then quickly slipped in a proposal to raise the salary cap for high-performing front-of-house staff, specifically those who had the potential to become the face of the restaurant. He even had the audacity to say there was one new server who was exceptionally talented and needed to be retained at all costs. I placed my fork down slowly. I stared right through him. The audacity of this man was truly spectacular. He was asking me, his legal wife and the majority owner, for permission to give his mistress a raise using our corporate funds. Did he think I was that stupid? Or was he so drunk on lust that his logic had completely evaporated? With a deadpan voice, I asked, "What is the name of this exceptional employee?" He uttered the name Briana with a slight stammer. He claimed she was diligent, fast, and beloved by the customers. I offered a thin smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. Inside, I was laughing. Beloved by the customers or beloved by you? But I rejected it outright. I reminded him that corporate policy was clear. Salary increases were strictly evaluated annually based on comprehensive performance reviews, not the subjective feelings of the CEO. Furthermore, a new server had to prove their loyalty for a minimum of 6 months before we even discussed incentives. I reminded him of the volatile global economy and the absolute necessity of budget efficiency. His face soured. He tried to argue, accusing me of being too rigid and bureaucratic. He He claimed the restaurant business was about people, about feelings, not just spreadsheets. He started getting emotional, his voice rising a pitch. That was the telltale sign he was cornered. He had likely already promised the girl a massive raise or a new title, and now he was facing the reality that he had no actual power to deliver it. I didn't take the bait. I simply picked up my linen napkin, dabbed my lips, and stated that my decision was final. If the girl is truly exceptional, let the restaurant manager report it in next month's evaluation. It is highly inappropriate and beneath your station for a CEO to micromanage a waitress's paycheck, I said, twisting the knife. He fell silent. His face burned red with suppressed anger and humiliation. He knew he couldn't force my hand. I was the central bank of his life. Without my signature, he couldn't alter any significant financial structures. He spent the rest of dinner in brooding silence, sawing at his wagyu, as if he were cutting my throat. Once dinner was over, he excused himself to his study, claiming he had documents to review. I knew it was a lie. He was going to call the girl and try to pacify her because his sweet promises had fallen through. I sat alone at the massive dining table, accompanied only by the melting candles. The events of the evening solidified my resolve. Arthur had crossed the line. He wasn't just playing with fire, he was trying to burn our house down with it. His desperate attempt to elevate Briana's status and salary proved she wasn't just a one-night stand. There was emotional entanglement, or at the very least, severe manipulation from her end. This was dangerous. If left unchecked, Briana would become a massive parasite, demanding more and more assets. I had to act fast. I had to sever this weed at the root before it strangled my garden. I summoned the head butler and asked him to prepare casual clothing for me tomorrow morning. Not the designer power suits I wore to the corporate tower, but something that still looked expensive yet entirely unassuming. As if I were just a bored, wealthy housewife out for a casual lunch in the city. I also told him to clear my entire schedule for tomorrow, citing a minor illness. That night, I slept in my own master suite. We had maintained separate bedrooms for 3 years. I lay on the fret sheets, staring at the high ceiling, mapping out tomorrow's scenario. I would arrive at the restaurant unannounced. I would sit, order, and let the play unfold before my eyes. I wanted to see exactly how arrogant this Briana was when she didn't know who I was. Would she serve me with the exceptional talent my husband raved about, or would she show her true colors? A long sigh escaped my lips. Sometimes I wondered, is there even a fraction of pain in my heart seeing my husband fight so hard for another woman? I touched my chest. Empty. There was no heartbreak, only fatigue and a fierce, primal instinct to protect what belonged to me. Love might be dead between us, but pride and business were things I would take to the grave. Tomorrow I would teach them both a lesson in the hierarchy of survival. You cannot bite the hand that feeds you without fatal consequences. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the silk drapes, casting golden lines across my plush Persian rug, but the warmth did nothing to melt the ice that had encased my heart since yesterday. I stood in my walk-in closet, a space rivaling a Parisian boutique. Usually my hand would gravitate toward a sharp navy or black blazer, my armor for the boardroom. Clothes that screamed power and made old men on the board think twice before speaking. But today my mission was different. I wasn't declaring open war. I was infiltrating. I needed camouflage, something that made me look harmless, but still radiated class to those who understood it. My eyes scanned the racks and stopped on a beige Loro Piana silk blouse. The fabric draped flawlessly, entirely unbranded, but deadly in its subtle luxury. I paired it with matching wide-leg trousers and a pair of the Row deerskin flats that cost as much as a month's rent in Brooklyn. In the mirror, I assessed my reflection. Without my signature sharp eyeliner and blood-red lipstick, I looked softer. My hair, usually pulled into a severe chignon, was left down in natural waves. I looked like a bored politician's wife, or perhaps a wealthy divorcee killing time between shopping sprees on Fifth Avenue. Perfect. This was the exact mask I needed to see the true face of my own empire. I went downstairs. The house was quiet. Arthur had left early. He claimed he had a breakfast meeting with potential investors. I knew that was garbage. He was probably rushing to the city to comfort his little investment after failing to secure her raise. I called my driver David, an older, fiercely loyal man who had been with me since my company was just one cramped office above a bodega. In the car, I told David to take me to the Gilded Swan, but I ordered him to drop me off 2 blocks away from the entrance. I wanted to walk. I wanted to feel the street vibe around my property, to see how ordinary people viewed the place from the outside. David looked at me through the rearview mirror, deeply confused. He was used to dropping me off exactly at the VIP entrance, not letting me walk the hot New York pavement. But he had worked for me long enough to know better than to ask questions. When I stepped out of the car, the humid city heat hit me instantly. I slipped on a pair of oversized sunglasses that covered half my face. I walked slowly, savoring my new role as an observer. From a distance, the restaurant looked majestic. The historic brownstone we had renovated 3 years ago stood proudly on the most strategic corner of the street. Its facade gleamed, and the polished brass sign reading "The Gilded Swan" caught the sunlight perfectly. This was my pride. The concept, the menu, the interior design, everything was born from my brain. Arthur only showed up for the ribbon cutting to smile for the press. I approached the entrance. A sharply dressed doorman opened the heavy glass door, bowing politely. A blast of cold air smelling of lavender and freshly baked sourdough hit me. The smell of money. The restaurant was packed for a weekday lunch service. The clinking of heavy silver polite laughter and low-volume instrumental jazz created a lulling symphony of success. At a glance, everything looked perfect, but my highly trained eyes immediately began spotting the micro-fractures invisible to a layman. A thin layer of dust on the frame of a painting near the entrance. A male busboy walking with a terrible slouch, his shirt slightly untucked. At the host stand, the young hostess was gossiping with a coworker, giggling and letting the phone ring 3 times before picking it up. Small things, trivial to most people, but to me, these were symptoms of a disease. Discipline was slipping. Standards were dropping. I approached the host stand. The girl finally looked at me after putting the phone down. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were unfocused. She asked if I had a reservation. I shook my head. She frowned as if my walking in unannounced was a massive personal inconvenience, even though I could clearly see at least 5 empty tables in the main dining area. After pretending to check the reservation iPad for a full minute, a classic cheap tactic to make a restaurant look more exclusive than it is, she finally led me to a table near the window. The vantage point was excellent. From here, I could see the entire floor, including the kitchen doors and the staircase leading to the second-floor VIP lounge. I sat down and placed my handbag on the empty chair. My eyes swept the room, and there he was. Arthur. He was just coming down from the second floor, laughing loudly with a group of men in bespoke suits. He looked so charismatic, so alive. He patted one of his guests on the shoulder, then signaled a waiter to bring something over, likely a complimentary bottle of wine, playing the generous owner on my dime. My stomach churned, not out of love, but absolute disgust. He was playing king with my treasury, entirely blind to the fact that the foundation of his fake castle was being eaten by termites he brought in himself. He didn't see me. Of course he didn't. He was too busy being the center of attention. Besides, who would pay attention to a middle-aged woman sitting alone in a corner in his glamorous world? I was just background noise. I opened the menu the hostess had left. It was heavy-bound in genuine leather. But as I opened it, I spotted a tiny grease stain on the 3rd page. My eye twitched. A stain on a Michelin-starred menu is a mortal sin. It showed a catastrophic lack of attention to detail. Management was supposed to check every single menu before service. If something this basic slipped through, I dreaded to think what was happening in the kitchen. I closed the menu and watched the floor staff. They looked busy, but it was inefficient chaos. 2 servers walked in the same direction empty-handed, while a dirty table sat uncleared in another corner. There was no coordination. This wasn't a well-led team. It was a group of individuals scrambling without a commander. And then I saw her. She walked out of the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks. Her hair was dyed an aggressively bright blonde that clashed with our grooming standards, and her uniform had clearly been tailored to be uncomfortably tight, highlighting her curves. She was young, maybe early 20s, with a pretty face plastered in makeup far too heavy for a daytime shift. There was an undeniable aura of arrogance in her stride. She didn't walk with the crisp efficiency of a professional server. She sauntered as if the dining room floor was her personal runway. That has to be Briana. My instincts screamed it. There was something entirely alien about her presence here. She lacked the baseline fear or respect typical of junior staff. When she passed the floor manager, she didn't nod or acknowledge him. In fact, the manager stepped aside to let her pass. Incredible. The hierarchy in this building was completely inverted. The boss's mistress outranked the general manager. I watched her serve a table across from me. She flirted openly with a male customer, flashing a dazzling smile, but her face instantly went flat when the woman at the table asked for extra sauce. Her body language was aggressive. She practically slammed the glass down on their table. No grace, no hospitality. My blood began to boil at a slow simmer. This restaurant was built on the philosophy that the guest is royalty, that every plate is art, and every interaction is an experience. This girl with her brazen audacity was destroying the reputation I had spent years building in a matter of seconds. And Arthur let her. Arthur wanted to pay her more to do it. I raised my hand slightly, signaling for a server. As luck would have it, Briana was walking in my direction. She saw my hand. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw her literally roll her eyes. It was fast, subtle, but I caught it. She didn't come over immediately. She stopped to pretend to fold a napkin at an empty table first, stalling, establishing dominance, showing me that she controlled her time, not me. Breathe, Claire. Stay calm. This was a test of patience. This was evidence gathering. Don't pounce yet. Let the prey walk all the way into the trap. After almost 2 minutes, an eternity in fine dining, she finally dragged her feet over to my table. She stood next to me. Her weight shifted onto one hip, completely off balance. No warm smile, no greeting, just, yeah. Her voice nasal and devoid of a single ounce of respect. The show was on. I looked at her with an innocent expression, hiding the apex predator behind the mask of a confused diner. I was going to see exactly how far she would push, how deep she would dig her own grave today. I haven't had a chance to look at the beverage menu thoroughly, I said, keeping my voice intentionally soft so she would be forced to lean in or listen closely. Could you recommend a red wine that pairs well with the lamb shank? Briana let out a highly audible sigh, making it explicitly clear I was annoying her. She didn't lean in. She just stared at her bright red manicured nails, health code violation number 1, before looking down at me with pure condescension. "We have a lot of wine here, ma'am," she said lazily. She grabbed the leather wine list off the table roughly and flipped it open at random. "Depends on your budget. If you just want something basic, we have a cheap house wine. It's only $15 a glass." Mani Naidi. She placed heavy emphasis on the word cheap, using the exact tone luxury retail workers use to intimidate customers they think are too poor to be in the store. She was profiling me based on my understated outfit. She thought because I wasn't draped in massive diamonds or carrying a purse with a giant logo, I was someone who needed to worry about a $15 glass of wine. I smiled faintly, suppressing the urge to laugh in her vacant face. "I wasn't asking about the price, miss. I was asking about the pairing. What flavor profile best complements your lamb today?" Briana looked genuinely stumped. It was glaringly obvious she had zero product knowledge. A server at the Gilded Swan was required to undergo a brutal 2-week intensive training on wine pairings before they were allowed to speak to a guest. The fact that she was standing here with an empty head proved she had bypassed all training protocols entirely shielded by my husband. Just anything red, really," she bluffed, trying to mask her ignorance with aggression. She pointed blindly at a name on the page. "Cabernet Sauvignon. It's our best seller. Rich people usually order this one." Once again playing the rich people card, as if that was the only metric of quality. "That's a very young Cabernet," I corrected softly, reading the vintage. "The acidity might be a bit too sharp for a heavy rosemary reduction. What about the Merlot on the next page? The Chateau Petrus." Hearing the name of the legendary wine, Briana's eyes widened a fraction. She looked me up and down, reassessing. Maybe she thought I was just a snob showing off. Or maybe she thought I was delusional enough to order a bottle that cost more than her rent. "That's really expensive, ma'am," she sneered, dropping all pretense of politeness. She crossed her arms over her chest, a highly defensive, unprofessional posture. "Are you sure you want to order that? We don't sell that one by the glass. You have to buy the whole bottle." Don't be shocked when the check comes and try to complain to the manager. Salty! My blood hummed not with rage, but with pure awe. The arrogance of this girl was distilled perfection. She felt so secure, so utterly untouchable, that she forgot her primary job was to serve. She didn't look at me as a guest bringing revenue to the restaurant that paid her wages. She looked at me as a nuisance, someone beneath her. How deeply ironic, considering her paycheck literally came from my signature. I believe I can manage the bill, I replied, evenly locking eyes with her. Please bring me a bottle. And please ensure it's at the correct temperature. 60 degrees Fahrenheit, not too cold. Briana scoffed. Yeah. So picky, she muttered under her breath as she turned around. She thought I couldn't hear her. My ears are very sharp, sweetheart. And my memory is even sharper. She strutted toward the bar, her hips swaying exaggeratedly. I watched her talk to the bartender, pointing back at my table while laughing. The young bartender just nodded awkwardly, looking intimidated. Briana was clearly the little queen of this floor, a fake queen whose power was entirely borrowed from a weak king. While waiting, I scanned the room again. At another table, a senior waiter was explaining a dish flawlessly to an older couple. There is still hope, I thought. Not every apple in this barrel is rotten. It was just this one that needed to be thrown out before the rot spread. But the problem was, the rotten apple was being protected by the orchard owner. 10 minutes passed, an absurd amount of time just to pull a bottle of wine. I looked over and saw Briana chatting up a male busboy near the kitchen doors. She laughed loudly, the sound cutting through the elegant jazz music. She didn't care in the slightest that a guest was waiting. Finally, she walked over carrying the bottle of Merlot and a crystal glass. She slammed the glass down on the marble table. The sharp clack of crystal on stone made me wince. If she chipped that glass, it was $20 down the drain. She opened the bottle with terrible technique, nearly breaking the cork. Then, without offering a tasting pour, an absolute mandatory procedure for a wine of this caliber, she simply tipped the bottle and filled my glass almost to the brim. It was a desecration of culinary art. Red wine is never poured to the top. It needs space to breathe in the glass to release its aroma. There, she said curtly, turning to leave. Wait, I called out. She stopped and whipped around her face a mask of supreme annoyance. What now, ma'am? It's too full, and you didn't decant it, I said flatly. A vintage this old needs to be decanted for at least 20 minutes to separate the sediment and let it open up, and you over-poured it. This isn't a frat party keg stand. Briana's face flushed red, not with embarrassment, but with pure, unadulterated, ego-driven rage. She felt humiliated by someone she deemed inferior. She took a step toward my table, invading my personal space. Listen here, lady, she hissed, her voice venomous. I work hard here. Don't act like you know better than me. If you want to drink wine with all these complicated rules, stay home and drink it yourself. We are busy here. Stop complaining. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers. Service is the core of this business, Briana, I said, deliberately reading her crooked name tag. And your ignorance is a terrible reflection on the management of this restaurant. Who trained you? That question pressed the wrong button, or perhaps exactly the right one. Her face twisted into pure hatred. The cornered wild animal decided to attack. Don't you bring management into this, she snapped, loud enough that heads at 3 neighboring tables snapped toward us. You don't know who I am. You think you can just walk in here, order an expensive bottle, and act like the boss? I could have security throw you out right now for harassing the staff. Throw me out, I asked, unable to hide my dark amusement. On what grounds? Because I demanded the standard of service I am paying for. Because you're a nightmare, she yelled, losing all control. She grabbed the open bottle of wine off the table, her hands shaking with fury. You rich people just love to complain. You get a little money and think you own the world. Well, let me tell you something. She paused, as if weighing whether to drop her trump card. Then, with a terrifyingly smug smile, she continued. My husband owns this place, Arthur. So if he tells you to get out, you get out. Silence. An eerie, heavy silence suddenly blanketed a 20-foot radius around us. Diners who had been pretending not to listen were now staring openly. The statement was so vulgar, so intensely stupid, and so utterly fatal. She had just publicly claimed my husband as her own in front of high-end clientele and used his name to threaten a guest. I looked at her with a profound sense of pity. "You foolish girl, you just signed your own death warrant." "Your husband?" I asked softly. "You are certain Arthur is your husband?" "Yeah." Surprised, she challenged, tilting her chin up. "So before I call the manager to drag you out, you better pay and leave." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at her with an intensity that made her smug smile waver. She started to realize something was wrong. She could feel the aura I was projecting, the same aura that made CFO's sweat now bleeding through my casual clothes. That sudden anxiety made her reckless. She needed to assert dominance. She needed to do something dramatic to end this and prove she held the power. Her hand gripping the neck of the bottle jerked. "Are you leaving or not?" she barked. And then it happened. Whether her hand was slick with sweat or whether she did it on purpose in a fit of rage, the bottle tilted too far. The dark, heavy red liquid splashed out violently, erupting from the neck like fresh blood straight onto my chest. Cold, wet, sticky. In a fraction of a second, my beige Loro Piana silk blouse turned a violent shade of dark purple. The wine soaked through the fabric, instantly dripping onto my trousers and pooling on the floor. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the air. The entire restaurant gasped. A fork clattered to the floor in the distance. Time seemed to freeze. Briana stood paralyzed, her eyes wide as she realized what she had just done. For one split second, I saw pure terror in her eyes. But then her defense mechanism kicked in. She didn't apologize. Instead, she took a step back, played the victim, and shrieked, "See, you bumped my arm. Look what you did. That's a fortune spilled." I sat perfectly still amidst the chaos. The wine dripped from my chin. A normal person would scream. A normal person would cry, curse, or throw a punch. But I didn't. I felt a supreme, icy calm wash over me. This was the casus belli, the justification for war I had been looking for. She had just handed it to me on a silver platter. The charade was over. With slow, deliberate movements, I picked up my linen napkin. I dabbed the wine off my face, wiping away the drops, as if they were mere dust. Then I looked up at Briana, who was pale but still trying to look fierce. I smiled a terribly cold smile, the smile of a shark smelling blood in the water. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't even look at the screen as my thumb held down speed dial number 1. Briana frowned. "Who are you calling? The cops? Go ahead. Arthur will back me up." The line connected on the second ring. I pressed the speakerphone button and set the phone down on the wine-soaked table. "Hello, darling." Arthur's voice, crisp, cheerful, and dripping with fake affection, filled the tense air between us. Briana's face instantly drained of all color, turning white as a sheet. She recognized the voice. Of course she did. It was her husband. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Briana's trembling pupils, and spoke into the phone with a terrifyingly flat tone. "Arthur," I said, "come down to the main floor. Immediately. Your enthusiastic new wife just bathed me in a bottle of Petrus. I believe she is severely confused about who actually owns this building." A sharp click echoed from the speaker as the call ended abruptly, followed by total suffocating silence in the Gilded Swan. It was a heavy silence, the kind that presses against your chest, as if all the oxygen in the room had been vacuumed out. The soft jazz playing overhead suddenly felt like inappropriate background noise. Dozens of pairs of eyes were locked onto our table. Diners had abandoned their meals. Forks hung in midair. Briana stood frozen. Her complexion had gone from flushed with rage to a sickly, corpse-like gray. She stared at the phone on the table, then up at me, her face twisting in a cocktail of disbelief and a rising panic that was crawling up her throat. But denial is a powerful drug. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to lie to themselves when reality is too horrific to accept. That was a recording, right? Her voice shook as she desperately reached for logic. She forced a hollow, hysterical laugh. "Yeah, it's a prank app. You think you can scare me with a fake voice?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just sat up straight, letting the sticky Merlot begin to dry on my skin. The physical discomfort was real cold and gross, but I ignored it. In business, the person who can endure pain the longest without blinking is the one who wins. I calmly poured the remaining drops of wine from the bottle into my glass, watching the red liquid swirl. "Just give it 10 seconds. I murmured softly, more to myself than to her. Right on cue, the frantic sound of footsteps pounded down the wooden staircase at the back of the room. It wasn't the composed, authoritative stride of a CEO. It was the panicked, stumbling sprint of a desperate man. The sound grew louder. Arthur burst into view at the bottom of the stairs. He looked nothing like the polished executive I had seen 10 minutes ago. His tie was askew. His hair was ruffled as if he had run his hands through it in sheer terror. And his face, oh, his face was a masterpiece of pure dread. Cold sweat made his forehead shine. His wild eyes scanned the room, searching for the epicenter of the disaster that had just summoned him. When his eyes landed on my table, I watched the exact moment his soul left his body. He saw me sitting there, drenched in red wine, my expression as cold as Arctic ice. Then he saw Briana standing next to me, the empty bottle still near her hand. The tableau told him everything he needed to know without a single word. "Arthur." Briana's shriek shattered the tension. The foolish girl. Seeing her lover appear, she thought the cavalry had arrived. She trotted over to him, her face morphing back into forced arrogance mixed with a sickeningly sweet whine. "Babe, thank God you're here," she announced loudly, making sure the whole room knew their status. She looped her arm through Arthur's rigid one. "Look at this crazy woman. She comes in here causing problems, complaining about everything, and then she pretended to call you using some weird app. Kick her out, babe. She's stressing me out." Arthur didn't move. He stared at Briana as if she were a radioactive mutant. Then he looked back at me. I raised my wine glass a fraction of an inch toward him, a deeply threatening toast. "Let go of me," Arthur hissed. His voice was hoarse and low, but loud enough for the tables near the stairs to hear. Briana frowned, confused. "What, Arthur, didn't you hear what this old—" "I said, let go of me, you idiot," Arthur roared. Briana jumped, startled, and dropped her hold. Arthur shoved her hand away violently, as if he had just been touched by the plague. Briana stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock. She had never seen this side of Arthur before, the cowardly side, desperate to save his own neck. Arthur didn't spare her a second glance. He half ran, half tripped toward my table, ignoring the bewildered stares of his staff and the whispers of the guests who were now recording the scene on their iPhones. He reached my table and did something that made Briana's jaw hit the floor. He bowed a deep, subservient bow that communicated total submission. "Clare!" Arthur choked out, gasping for air. "Honey, my God, what happened? Why are you covered in—" His hand reached out, wanting to touch my shoulder, wanting to wipe the stain, or perhaps just wanting to verify I was real. I leaned back slightly, avoiding his touch. My glare froze his hand in midair. "Do not touch me," I said softly. My voice was calm, a jarring contrast to the chaos around us. "Your hands are dirty, Arthur, just as dirty as the management of your restaurant." Arthur swallowed hard. He looked back at Briana, who was still standing by the stairs, paralyzed, then back to me. "Claire, this is a misunderstanding. I can explain. Briana, she's a new hire. She probably doesn't know our standards yet." "Standards," I cut in sharply. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the marble floor. Despite my ruined, sticky clothes, I stood tall, radiating an authority that made Arthur instinctively take a step back. What kind of standard allows a server to insult a guest? What kind of standard allows staff to pour wine like animals? And most intriguingly, what kind of standard allows a low-level waitress to call the owner her husband and threaten to blacklist a patron? The words landed like physical blows across Arthur's face. He turned ashen gray. He knew I had heard everything. There was no room left for denial. Meanwhile, behind him, Briana's brain finally finished processing the data. She heard Arthur call me Clare. She saw how utterly terrified the man she viewed as her protector was of me. Reality was violently tearing down her fantasy world. "Arthur?" Briana's voice was small, hesitant. She took a step closer. Who is this woman? Why are you scared of her? You told me your wife was some old monster living in Europe. You said you were divorcing her." Ah, classic. The old monster in Europe. Arthur's creativity in lying was truly pathetic. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I walked past Arthur, stopping right in front of Briana. "Let me introduce myself," I said, my voice ringing clear across the dining room. "My name is Clare. I am not a monster, and I certainly don't live in Europe. I live in the same house as this man. We sleep under the same roof, and most importantly, I paused, dramatically savoring the absolute destruction in Briana's eyes. I am the majority owner of the corporation that signs your paychecks. This building, this table, the wine you just spilled, even the uniform you modified to seduce my husband, they all belong to me. Briana's mouth fell open. Briana's. Her legs gave out slightly, and she stumbled back into an empty table. No way. Arthur said he was the sole owner. I shot a look at Arthur that could have skinned a man alive. Tell her, Arthur. Tell your new wife who really holds the leash here. Tell her exactly whose money paid for those designer bags you've been buying her. Nisha. Arthur was shaking. Sweat poured down his face. He was trapped. On one side, the young mistress he had lied to. On the other, his legal wife who held the keys to the vault and his entire future. The choice was easy, though agonizing for his ego. Clare is my legal wife, Arthur muttered, staring down at his expensive Italian loafers. She is the chairman of the board. Louder, I snapped. Arthur flinched. He looked up at Briana with a mix of apology and resentment. She is my wife, Briana. Clare owns everything. I'm just the CEO. Are you happy now? That shout broke everything. Briana covered her mouth with her hands. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her heavy mascara. Her fantasy of becoming a high society wife, of marrying a billionaire, of living in luxury without working at all, shattered into a million pieces on the cold restaurant floor. I watched the spectacle with cold satisfaction. But I wasn't done. Confession wasn't enough. There had to be an execution. Blood had to be spilled metaphorically to wash out the stain on my blouse and the stain on my business. Excellent, I said flatly. I grabbed a fresh napkin from the nearest table and wiped the sticky wine from my hands. Now that we have clarified the family tree and the corporate structure, let's talk about consequences. I looked over at the floor manager, Harrison, who had been hiding behind a pillar. Harrison, come here. The middle-aged man scurried over, his face just as pale as Arthur's. Yes, Mrs. Clare. I am so sorry. I didn't know. Quiet. I cut him off. I will deal with your total failure to supervise your staff later. Right now, I want Arthur to clean up the trash he brought inside. I pivoted back to Arthur. My eyes demanded absolute obedience. You brought her in through the back door, Arthur. You falsified her qualifications. You gave her fake power. So now, I pointed toward the glass exit doors. You throw her out. Fire her. Right now. Arthur stared at me, eyes wide. Clare, not here. Let's do this at the office. Here. I pressed my voice razor sharp. She humiliated me in public, on my own territory. She will receive her punishment in public. Do it, or tomorrow morning I will call an emergency board meeting to evaluate the CEO position. You know I have the votes. You know I will do it. The threat was terminal. Arthur knew I never bluffed about business. Losing the CEO title meant losing his identity, his allowance, his access to the elite world. He had no choice. Arthur turned slowly to face Briana. His shoulders slumped. The weight of his defeat crushed him. Briana looked at him with a dim, desperate hope, praying the man still had a shred of love or courage left to defend her. But Arthur was a coward, and cowards always save themselves first. The air inside the Gilded Swan was razor thin. Not a single fork clinked. Every eye was locked on the three-act tragedy unfolding in the center of the room. The kitchen staff were peeking through the swinging doors, watching the downfall of the girl who had acted like royalty. I stood tall beside the ruined table, watching Arthur like a hawk tracking its prey. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to scrape together whatever authority he had left. He couldn't look Briana in the eye. He stared at her shoulder instead. Briana. Arthur's voice cracked mid-sentence. He cleared his throat and tried again. Briana, your behavior today is entirely unacceptable. You insulted a guest. You committed physical assault by spilling a beverage. And you massively overstepped your authority. Briana shook her head slowly, black mascara-stained tears tracking down her flushed cheeks. Arthur, what are you saying? You promised to marry me. You said this woman meant nothing. Enough! Arthur interrupted quickly, terrified she would air more of their dirty laundry right there. He shot me a panicked glance, but my face remained a stone wall. Personal matters have no bearing on professional conduct. What you did to Mrs. Clare is a gross violation. Arthur clenched his fist, the veins in his neck popping. He was killing a part of himself, the part that thrived on this young girl's worship. Effective immediately. Arthur continued, forcing his voice louder. You are terminated. Pack your things and leave the premises now. The word now echoed through the massive dining room. Briana gasped as if she had been shot. She opened her mouth to protest, to scream, but no sound came out. Her legs finally gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor. It was a pathetic sight. The girl who 10 minutes ago stood tall and challenged me was now slumped on the floor like a discarded rag doll. You're evil, Arthur, she wailed, her voice breaking. You're a liar. You used me. Arthur turned his face away, unable to watch. He looked at me silently, begging for approval, for a sign that he had obeyed his master. It's done, Clare. Let Harrison handle the rest. Not quite, I said coldly. Arthur's eyes widened. What else? She's fired. I stepped past Arthur, towering over Briana as she sobbed on the floor. I felt no pity. Sympathy is an expensive commodity utterly wasted on those who try to destroy you. She wasn't an innocent victim. She was an active participant who reveled in the arrogance of borrowed power. She was only crying because she lost, not because she was sorry. Stand up, I commanded. Briana looked up, her eyes full of venom, but she didn't move. I glanced at the head of security who had materialized near the entrance. Help her up. 2 burly security guards stepped forward. They hauled Briana to her feet effortlessly, forcing her to stand even as her legs wobbled. I looked her dead in the eye. Listen to me carefully, little girl. You might think this is just about losing a waitressing job. You might think you can just walk across the street to the next fine dining spot and start your drama there. You are wrong. I pulled out my phone and quickly typed a message to Rachel. I just sent an instruction to corporate headquarters, I said, flashing the screen at her. Your name, your photo, and the security footage of today's incident will be blasted to the New York Hospitality Association within the hour. We share a blacklist. With my influence, I guarantee there isn't a single reputable restaurant, hotel, or bar in this city or this state that will ever hire you. Not as a server, not as a dishwasher, nothing. Briana's eyes dilated to their absolute limit. She choked on a sob. Getting fired was one thing. Getting blacklisted from the entire industry was a career death sentence. You can't do that, she screamed hysterically, trying to thrash against the guard's grip. That's illegal. I'll sue you. Please do, I replied calmly. My lawyer makes more in an hour than you will make in a lifetime. Try it. I would absolutely love to countersue you for defamation, physical assault, and destruction of property. I leaned in closer. Dropping my voice to a whisper meant only for her and Arthur. Consider this your final lesson. Do not play in a league where you don't understand the rules. You tried to become the queen by seducing the king, but you forgot who actually owns the chessboard. I gave the guards a nod. Take her out, the front door. Ensure she leaves with nothing that doesn't belong to her. Briana shrieked as she was dragged away. She cursed Arthur. She cursed me. She cursed the universe. Her voice faded into the distance until the heavy glass doors finally shut behind her. Silence descended on the room once again. This time, it was thick with fear. I turned to face the staff who were frozen in place. Their faces were chalk white. They had just witnessed a public execution. They saw how effortlessly I destroyed someone who dared to cross me. All of you. My voice projected calm but laced with iron authority. What you saw today is what happens when standards are compromised. I do not tolerate disrespect, unprofessionalism, or corruption in my company. My eyes locked onto the trembling manager. Harrison, clean up this mess and ensure every guest in this room receives complimentary dessert and champagne as an apology for the disruption. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I want a performance evaluation of every single staff member on my desk. If I find one more incompetent nepotism, hire your termination letter will follow. Yes, Mrs. Clare. Right away. Harrison stammered, terrified for his livelihood. The room slowly thawed. Staff sprang into action, moving with a hyper-efficiency driven by productive terror. The guests began whispering again, but this time the tone was awe, not mockery. I picked up my handbag, which thankfully survived the wine spill. I felt sticky, smelled of cheap alcohol, and was exhausted. But I was also deeply satisfied. I looked at Arthur, who was still standing like a statue. He looked utterly broken. His shoulders slumped. His face was a ruin. He had just lost his mistress, his pride, and the respect of his employees in one fell swoop. "Let's go home," I told him, not bothering to make eye contact. "Claire." Arthur reached for my hand again, but I walked past him toward the door. "Don't misunderstand Arthur," I said, walking briskly as he trailed behind me like a beaten dog. "We are going home because I need a shower. And you? You have a lot of explaining to do before I decide if you get to keep that CEO chair." I stepped out into the blazing New York afternoon. I climbed into the back of the Maybach and closed my eyes. Arthur slid in beside me in total silence, not daring to breathe too loudly. He knew the real storm wouldn't begin until we got home. And this time, he had no umbrella. The drive from Tribeca back to Greenwich felt like crossing two different time zones. Inside the soundproof cabin of the Maybach, the silence wasn't just the absence of noise, it was a living, suffocating entity. David, the driver, stared intensely at the road, refusing to glance at the rearview mirror. He knew a war was brewing in the back seat, and collateral damage was common in the wars of the rich. I sat on the left looking out the window. The chaotic New York traffic felt ironic. Out there, people were fighting just to survive, sweating in the summer heat. Inside this air-conditioned bubble of extreme wealth, two people who had everything were hurtling toward emotional annihilation. The Merlot stain on my silk blouse had dried into a stiff, dark crust. The smell was getting nauseating, a mix of fermented grapes and the stench of failure. Arthur sat on the far right, pressing himself against the door as if a force field separated us. He was staring at his phone screen, but I knew he wasn't reading. His thumb just swiped endlessly. Every so often, he would let out a shaky breath. He looked like an inmate being driven to the gallows, awaiting the judge's final verdict. The car turned into our estate. The security guard saluted, oblivious to the fact that the master of the house had just had his spine ripped out in public. When the car stopped at the main portico, I didn't wait for David to open the door. I got out myself, my steps fast and decisive. "My office. Now," I ordered, not looking back. I didn't need to check if he was following. Arthur trailed behind me like a reluctant shadow. We bypassed the grand living room, walked past the spiral staircase, and headed straight into the West Wing. My home office was a sanctuary. No staff were allowed inside without clearance. The walls were paneled in dark oak, lined with bookshelves reaching the ceiling. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room. This was where I drafted multi-million-dollar contracts, and today it was where I would put my husband on trial. I walked straight to the minibar in the corner. I needed a drink. Not alcohol I had bathed in, enough of that today, but ice-cold water to wash the bitter taste from my throat. I downed a glass in one go, then turned to face Arthur, who was standing awkwardly near the door. He looked so small in this room. His usually broad shoulders were hunched. "Sit," I said, pointing to the guest chair across from my desk. Arthur obeyed. He perched on the edge of the seat, wringing his hands in his lap. He looked like a schoolboy called into the principal's office. "Claire, He started, his voice raspy. "Quiet!" I cut him off sharply. I walked around the desk and sat in my high-backed leather chair, instantly elevating my physical position above his. I placed my hands on the desk and stared at him. "I didn't ask you to speak. I want you to listen." I opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. It was just empty stationery, but to Arthur, any paper I held could be a divorce decree or a termination of power of attorney. I let the fear marinate in his brain. "We had an agreement, Arthur." I began, my tone flat, as if reading a corporate contract. "Clause 4, do you remember it?" Arthur nodded weakly. "I remember." "State it," I demanded. He swallowed hard. I can have a private life as long as I don't embarrass you in public and I don't touch corporate funds." "Exactly," I said. "And today you violated both terms spectacularly. You didn't just embarrass me. You let your little whore throw wine in my face inside my own restaurant, in front of our elite clientele, in front of the staff. You let her claim your title, claim your name, and threaten a customer using power she borrowed from me." I paused, letting the words sink in like acid. And regarding the finances you tried to raise her salary last night, you used corporate funds to fund her lifestyle. You gave her perks she didn't earn. That is embezzlement, Arthur. In legal terms, it's theft. Arthur's face flushed. I didn't mean it like that, Claire. I got carried away. Briana, she was different at first. I let out a cynical laugh. Different how? Because she's young, because she stroked your fragile ego, because she made you feel like a real king instead of just a trophy husband. The words hit their mark. Arthur flinched, real pain in his eyes. For years, this was the elephant in the room we never discussed. The fact that his success was entirely manufactured by me, that without me, he was just a handsome face with average intellect. I'm not a trophy, Claire. He shot back, a spark of defensive pride flaring up. I work hard. I built the company's image. I lobby the politicians. I charm the media. Do you think it's easy smiling for the cameras every day while your own wife treats you like an intern? Oh, so we're playing the victim now, I asked calmly, entirely unbothered by his outburst. You felt pressured. You felt underappreciated. So your brilliant solution was to sleep with a waitress who doesn't even know how to hold a bottle of wine properly. She made me feel needed. Arthur stood up, his voice rising. She didn't look at me like a walking ATM or a corporate mascot. She looked at me as Arthur. She admired me. She admired your wallet, Arthur, I barked, my voice finally booming through the room. I stood up, glaring at him. Do you think a 20-something girl fell in love with your wrinkles? Do you think she was obsessed with your dad jokes? She saw the Maybach, the Patek Philippe, and the title? And the second she realized you weren't the real boss, you saw her reaction today. Did she defend you? Did she care about you when you fell? No, she only cared about herself. Arthur went silent. My words battered him with brutal truth. The image of Briana screaming and blaming him in the restaurant looped in his mind. The romantic fantasy he had built had collapsed, leaving only agonizing reality. He slowly sank back into the chair, his shoulders hunched deeper. He covered his face with his hands. I was stupid, he whispered. I was so stupid. Yes, you were. I agreed without hesitation. But your stupidity has a massive price tag. The Gilded Swan's reputation is tainted. That video is already circulating in Upper East Side group texts. By tomorrow morning, I'll be the prime gossip material at every charity luncheon in New York. Poor Clare, drenched in wine by her husband's side piece. I walked around the desk, stopping right beside his chair. I looked down at the crown of his head. I could divorce you right now, Arthur, I whispered near his ear. I have proof of adultery. I have witnesses. According to our prenup, I could make you walk out of this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. Arthur's body went rigid. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. The terror of poverty was far stronger than his humiliation. Claire, please, please don't, he begged. I'm sorry. I swear I'll never do it again. I'll do anything. Don't divorce me. This business, this life, it's all I have. Pathetic. The man who was worshipped as a visionary CEO by the public was now begging at my feet. But this was our true dynamic. I won't divorce you, I said after a torturous pause. Arthur's eyes widened, a sliver of hope. Really? Not because I love you, I added, quickly crushing any romantic delusions, but because a high-profile divorce is expensive and messy. Stocks will dip, investors will panic, and the media will dissect our private lives. I'm not letting my empire take a hit just because you couldn't keep your pants zipped. I walked back to my chair and sat down gracefully. But there is a price for this amnesty. You said you'd do anything right. Arthur nodded frantically. Anything, name it. Starting tomorrow, your powers as CEO are suspended, I declared. What? Arthur gasped. But Claire, what about the board meeting next month, the expansion into Miami, who will... I am taking full control indefinitely. I cut him off. You are being demoted to Chief Branding Officer. Your only job is to smile, attend galas, and be the pretty face of the company. You have zero signing authority for any expense over $1,000. Every strategic decision comes through me. That's essentially castrating me professionally, Arthur protested weakly. You castrated yourself when you let a waitress trample my dignity and the company's, I replied coldly. This isn't a negotiation, Arthur. It's an ultimatum. Take it or pack your bags tonight. Arthur sat in silence. He weighed his options. Be a figurehead with zero power, but keep the luxury lifestyle, or become a broke divorcee starting from scratch at 50. For a man addicted to comfort, it wasn't a hard choice. Fine, he whispered. I accept. Good, I said. One more thing. You need to clean up my name. Tomorrow you will release a press statement. You will say the incident was a misunderstanding caused by a mentally unstable employee and that management took immediate action. Do not mention the affair. Protect the family name not for you, but for the business. I understand, he said. Now get out. I'm sick of looking at you. Sleep in the guest house. My bedroom door is locked to you indefinitely. Arthur stood up shakily. He walked toward the door, his steps heavy. As he grabbed the handle, he paused and looked back at me. Clare, he asked softly, was there ever a time when you actually respected me? I looked at him, searching for the ghost of the man I married. Once, a long time ago, when you had your own ambition instead of just riding mine. But you killed that respect slowly, every time you took the easy way out. Arthur didn't reply. He looked down, walked out, and closed the door softly. Once he was gone, I didn't feel immediate relief. The room was quiet again, but it felt colder. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I had won. I maintained dominance, neutralized a threat, and secured my assets. But somehow, the victory felt hollow. I picked up my phone and opened my photo gallery. I found an old photo of us from 10 years ago, opening our first major venue. We looked exhausted in cheap clothes, but our eyes were bright with fire. Arthur had his arm around me, and I was laughing genuinely. When was the last time I laughed like that? I shook my head, banishing the sentimental weakness. Emotion is the enemy of business, and my marriage was my biggest business of all. I had to stay rational. I had to stay strong. Because at the top of this ivory tower, the wind blew hard, and one wrong step would send me plummeting. I walked into the private ensuite bathroom attached to my office. I peeled off the wine-stained silk blouse and threw it straight into the trash. I wouldn't have it dry cleaned. It was contaminated by bad memories. I turned on the shower, letting the scalding water wash away the residue of an exhausting day. Tomorrow was a new day. Tomorrow the queen would rule alone from the throne without the king beside her, and I was perfectly fine with that. The next morning the sun rose over New York with a false promise of a bright day. The sky was an industrial gray, mirroring my mood, overcast but highly functional. I woke up at 5 a.m., a routine that hadn't changed in 20 years, regardless of what hurricane hit my personal life. Discipline is the only thing that separates winners from losers. I came downstairs in a new suit, an ivory blazer with modern asymmetrical cuts paired with sleek black trousers, a look that was clean sharp and left no room for mercy. In the dining room, Arthur's chair was empty. The housekeeper informed me he had left at dawn. Coward. He was avoiding a morning confrontation. Or perhaps he was busy drafting the public apology I demanded. I ate breakfast alone, whole wheat toast, egg whites, black coffee. While eating, I checked my iPad. The news of the incident at the Gilded Swan had already hit several local gossip blogs and blind item Instagram accounts. The amateur video showed Briana screaming hysterically as security dragged her out. Thankfully, the angle didn't show my face clearly, just my rigid posture and Arthur looking panicked. The comments varied, but the majority condemned the entitled waitress and praised the management for acting decisively. Even though some speculated it was rich people drama, the public narrative was still controllable. That was what mattered. At exactly 8 a.m., my Maybach pulled up to corporate headquarters. The atmosphere was different today. The staff I passed in the lobby bowed a little deeper. Their greeting sounded nervous. Gossip spreads faster than a virus in a corporate tower. They all knew what had happened. They knew the queen was out for blood, and no one wanted to be the next casualty. I took the executive elevator. When the doors opened on the 45th floor, Rachel was waiting, looking tense. "Good morning, Mrs. Clare," she said quickly, matching my brisk pace down the hall. "Mr. Arthur is in conference room B with the PR team finalizing the press release, and Harrison, the manager of the Gilded Swan, has been in the waiting room since 7. "Let Harrison wait," I ordered, dropping my bag on my desk. "Let him reflect on his sins for another hour or two. Cold sweat is good for circulation." Rachel nodded, scribbling on her pad. "Yes, ma'am. And there's one more thing." She hesitated. "There's a woman down in the lobby. She claims to be Briana's mother. She's crying and demanding to see you. She says her daughter was set up and wants the blacklist revoked." I stopped shuffling papers. Interesting. Act 2 of the drama wanted to start early. Briana, the arrogant brat from yesterday, was now sending her mommy to beg. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Or perhaps the mother had no idea how rotten the fruit she raised truly was. "Throw her out," I said coldly without looking up. "But ma'am, she's threatening to call the press if you don't see her," Rachel said worriedly. I offered a thin smile. "Let her call the press. Let the media interview a mother defending a daughter who physically assaulted a patron and committed identity fraud. It will only cement our position as the victims. Tell security, if she isn't gone in 5 minutes, call the NYPD for trespassing and disturbing the peace." "Right away, ma'am." Rachel hurried out, relieved she didn't have to deal with the hysterical woman herself. I sat at my computer and opened the corporate organizational chart. Agenda item number 1, restructuring. I hovered my mouse over the box labeled Arthur CEO. With a few clicks, I dragged the box to a lateral position under a new reporting line and changed the title to Chief Branding Officer. Then I drew a direct line from every department head straight to my box, Clare. Chairman and Acting CEO. Digitally, it took 5 seconds, but the shockwave would be felt across every floor of this building. I hit send on a company-wide memo. Effective immediately, all operational and financial reporting lines will be directed to Mrs. Clare. Mr. Arthur will focus on external brand development. Corporate speak for my husband has been neutered. Do not bypass me. An hour later, I called Harrison in. The middle-aged manager entered looking like a crumpled receipt, his eyes puffy from lack of sleep. He stood in front of my desk, too terrified to sit. "Sit, Harrison," I said. He perched on the edge of the chair exactly like Arthur had the night before. "Mrs. Clare, I am so profoundly sorry. Save your apologies for the guests," I cut him off. I don't want an apology. I want an explanation. How does a waitress with zero experience, no basic skills, and the attitude of a street thug make it onto the floor of a Michelin-starred restaurant, and why did you allow it?" Harrison looked down, wringing his hands. It was a direct order from Mr. Arthur, ma'am. He brought Briana in. He told me she was a distant relative who needed a job. He ordered me to put her on prime shifts and skip the rigorous training. I didn't dare defy the CEO. "A distant relative," I scoffed. "The oldest lie in the book. And when she started acting out when she violated uniform codes and harassed guests you just watched. You are the general manager, Harrison. I pay you to run a world-class restaurant, not to babysit the boss's mistress." "I was terrified of being fired, ma'am," he admitted honestly. "Every time I reprimanded her, she threatened to call Mr. Arthur, and he did call me twice, telling me to go easy on her." I sighed. This was the cancer of corporate feudalism. Professional talent rendered impotent by palace politics. "Do you know why I haven't fired you yet, Harrison?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I assumed I was done. Because you are honest, and because for the 5 years before Briana showed up, your numbers were impeccable," I said. Harrison looked up stunned. "But this is your final warning," I continued. "From now on, your loyalty isn't to Arthur. It is to corporate standards. It is to me. If tomorrow Arthur brings in a goat and tells you to make it the executive chef, you reject it and call me directly. Understood?" "Understood, ma'am. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much." Harrison looked ready to cry from relief. "Get back to work. Tighten discipline. Fire anyone who slacks off. We have to restore the Gilded Swan's reputation in 30 days. If we fail, you're out." Harrison practically sprinted out, fueled by a new lease on life. People who survive the chopping block usually work twice as hard to prove their worth. That afternoon, I led a strategy meeting with the marketing team. Arthur was there sitting at the far opposite end of the table. He looked exhausted, but he was back in his bespoke armor. When I walked in, the room fell dead silent. I sat at the head of the table, Arthur's usual seat. He didn't protest. The shift in power was glaringly obvious to everyone. "We are shifting our brand strategy for Q3." I opened without preamble. "Our focus is no longer casual luxury. It is uncompromising perfection. We are launching a new campaign, the Queen's Standard." Pens scribbled furiously. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. The title was a direct jab, asserting who truly ruled. "Arthur," I called out. He jumped slightly. "As Chief Branding Officer, your job is to be the face of this campaign. You will feature in the ads talking about our fanatical dedication to quality. You will narrate how we do not tolerate a single mistake when it comes to guest satisfaction." It was deeply ironic. But the public loves a redemption arc disguised as corporate perfectionism. Arthur gave a stiff nod. "Yes, Mrs. Clare, the concept is strong." "It's not just strong, it's mandatory," I corrected. "Creative team, draft the scripts. I want Arthur looking authoritative but humbled, and ensure there are absolutely no young female extras in the frame this time. Just Arthur the food, and elegant ambiance." The meeting was hyper-efficient. I dominated every discussion, cutting down useless ideas and making rapid decisions. I felt alive again. This was where I belonged, ruling this room, controlling the fate of hundreds of employees. The adrenaline of power was masking the sting of Arthur's betrayal. Business is the ultimate cure for a broken heart. Later that afternoon, as I was auditing internal expenses to ensure Arthur hadn't siphoned off anything else, my personal cell phone rang, an unknown number. I usually ignore them, but my gut told me to answer. "Hello, Clare, darling." The woman's voice was familiar, but it took me a second to place it. It was Sarah, the wife of one of our biggest private equity investors and the undisputed gossip queen of the Upper East Side. "Sarah," I replied warmly, instantly sliding on my socialite mask. "What a surprise! To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Oh, nothing much, sweetie. Just checking in. I heard there was a tiny little incident at your restaurant yesterday. A video is going viral in the country club group chat." Her voice dripped with fake sympathy masking ravenous curiosity. She was fishing. She wanted my version to broadcast to the elite. I smiled wickedly. This was a golden opportunity. Controlling the narrative wasn't just about press releases. It was about the whispers in elite circles. "Oh, that," I said breezily, as if discussing a mild rainstorm. Yes, it was quite embarrassing. We had a new hire who was severely delusional. You know how these young girls are watching too much reality TV. She became dangerously obsessed with Arthur and started hallucinating that she was his wife. It's actually quite sad. She needs psychiatric help. "My God, really?" Sarah sounded thrilled. The bait was taken. "So she was a stalker, essentially?" "Yes. Poor Arthur. You know how friendly he is with the staff. She completely misread his kindness. I had to step in and handle the mess personally. Arthur is far too gentle to fire someone brutally, so I had to play the bad cop." I twisted the truth with elegant precision. I painted Arthur as the victim of his own kindness to save his face as my husband. And I framed Briana as a psychotic stalker to utterly obliterate her credibility. "Wow, you handled that brilliantly, Clare. If it were me, I would have dragged that girl out by her hair." Sarah laughed. "We are women of class, Sarah. We don't pull hair. We simply remove them from the chessboard," I replied. "So true. Oh, by the way, are we still on for the Charity Gala Committee meeting at your place next week?" "Absolutely. And I'll make sure the wine is poured by a master sommelier, not a hallucinating intern," I joked. Sarah cackled. We ended the call on excellent terms. I put the phone down deeply satisfied. Within an hour, all of Manhattan high society would know that Briana was a deranged stalker and Arthur was a devoted, overly friendly husband. The corporate reputation was safe. But as I was packing up to leave, I noticed a plain brown envelope sitting on top of the mail stack Rachel hadn't sorted yet. No return address, just Clare, written in messy block letters. I opened it. Inside were photographs. Pictures of Arthur and Briana, not at the restaurant, but inside an apartment. And there was a timestamp printed on the bottom corner. The date was from 2 years ago. My blood ran ice cold. 2 years. Arthur swore she was a new hire. He swore it was a fling of a few months, but these photos proved he had been maintaining this parallel life for 2 entire years. Briana had been in this picture long before she ever stepped foot in the Gilded Swan. Arthur hadn't just lied about some overtime pay and roses. He had lied about a massive double life. And then I pulled out the final piece of paper in the envelope, an ultrasound photo. The world stopped spinning. The grainy black and white image fluttered in my hand. Not because my hand was shaking, I never shake, but because it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. A tiny fetus curled inside a womb. In the bottom right corner, the patient name read, Briana Miller. The date 2 weeks ago. The empire I had just meticulously glued back together with threats and power abruptly cracked again. And this time the crack wasn't in the paint. It was in the foundation. 2 years. He didn't just sleep with a waitress. He financed her. And now there was an illegitimate heir growing in her stomach. In the world of legacy wealth, a child isn't just a baby. A child is a legal liability, an heir to shares a claim on the estate. If Arthur had a child out of wedlock, and if that child was legally recognized, they would have a claim to Arthur's assets. And for tax diversification and strategic reasons, a massive chunk of my wealth real estate minority shares was legally held in Arthur's name. This was no longer a matter of a betrayed wife's ego. This was a Tier 1 corporate threat, an existential threat to my assets. David, turn the car around, I ordered suddenly. Ma'am, we're almost at the Greenwich exit, David said, confused, glancing in the mirror. Turn it around. Take me to Daniel's law firm in Midtown. Now don't ask questions. I needed ammunition before I went home. I couldn't face Arthur with just rage. I needed legal documents. I needed absolute legal certainty regarding my assets if the worst-case scenario, a divorce with a child support inheritance dispute, blew up. An hour later, I was sitting in the mahogany-lined conference room of my powerhouse divorce attorney. Daniel inspected the photos with a grim expression. "This changes the landscape, Clare," Daniel said, taking off his glasses. "If this child is born and Arthur acknowledges it, or a DNA test proves paternity, that child has legal rights under New York law. They can stake a claim on Arthur's portion of the marital estate." "Arthur doesn't have a portion. Daniel, it's all my money," I snapped. "De facto, yes, but de jure you put 3 restaurant branches and 2 commercial properties in his name to dodge the higher tax brackets. If you blow up the marriage now without preparation, Arthur gets half in the divorce, and a huge chunk of that goes to Briana as child support." I massaged my temples. I've been feeding a snake that wasn't just venomous, it was laying eggs in my bed. "What's your advice?" I demanded. "Do not confront him about the pregnancy yet," Daniel said sharply. "We secure the assets first. You make Arthur sign a post-nuptial asset transfer agreement. We transfer all critical properties and shares back solely into your name tonight. Use the restaurant incident as leverage. He's currently terrified and feeling guilty, right? Weaponize that fear. Once the assets are legally yours again, then you drop the axe." It was a brilliant plan, cold-blooded, but brilliant. "Draft the transfer documents right now. I'll wait," I ordered. That night, I arrived back in Greenwich carrying a very different manila folder. This wasn't an empty prop to scare him. This was an execution warrant. The house was quiet. The lights in the living room were dimmed. Arthur was sitting on the sofa, a glass of scotch in his hand. He had showered and was wearing silk pajamas, but his face still carried the heavy toll of extreme mental exhaustion. When he saw me, he immediately sat up straight and put the glass down. "Claire, you're home late. I was waiting for you," he said, trying to sound agreeable. I didn't answer. I walked past him, dropped my Birkin on the console table, and sat in the armchair opposite him. I stared at him for a long time, looking for the traces of the man I once loved. 2 years. How many dinners did we share while he was thinking of her? How many times did he say, "I'm working late at the office," while playing house in Midtown? "Is there something you want to tell me, Arthur?" I asked, softly, offering him one final microscopic chance to be honest. Arthur looked confused. "About what the press release went out. The reception is positive. I did everything you asked." "Claire," I apologized. "Not about that," I said. "About the timeline. About how deep the hole you dug really is." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the brown envelope. I didn't throw it. I pulled the photos out slowly, placing the first one on the marble coffee table between us. A picture of them celebrating her birthday in the apartment. "Dated 2 years ago." Arthur's eyes bulged. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I put down the second photo. Them on vacation in Miami, the exact weekend he told me he was at a real estate conference. Arthur turned a sickening shade of pale, worse than at the restaurant. Then I played the ace, the ultrasound photo. Only the ticking of the antique grandfather clock could be heard, counting down the final seconds of our marriage. Arthur stared at the ultrasound in pure horror. His hands shook violently as he picked it up. Where did you get this? That is the wrong question, Arthur, I said coldly. The right question is it yours? Arthur looked up at me, his eyes wide with panic, shame, and terror. Claire, I can explain. She told me she was pregnant, but I don't know for sure it's mine. She could have slept with someone else. 2 years, Arthur, I interrupted, ignoring his pathetic deflection. You said she was a new hire. You said it was a fling of a few months, but you've been keeping her for 2 years. You paid for her apartment, you funded her life, and now you've given her a child. I didn't mean to... Arthur burst into tears. The middle-aged executive wept in front of me. Not tears of genuine remorse, but the tears of a child caught stealing candy. I'm trapped, Claire. It started as just fun, but then she got demanding. She threatened to kill herself if I left her, and now she says she's pregnant. And you did nothing. My voice rose slightly. You let this ticking time bomb sit in your pocket while you slept next to me every night. What was your master plan? Wait until she started showing and then smuggle her to Europe using my money. Arthur buried his face in his hands. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified you'd find out. I am not angry, Arthur, I said, my voice returning to a lethal calm. I am disgusted, not because you slept with another woman, but because you were so incredibly incompetent that you let a low-class hustler take control of your life and by extension threaten mine. I stood up and walked toward the window, turning my back to him. Who sent these photos? Arthur asked weakly. Think, I snapped. Who has access to these private photos? Who has the motive to destroy you after you fired her yesterday? Briana, Arthur whispered. Exactly. Your little mistress is launching a counterattack. She didn't send this to me, so I would divorce you and let you run into her arms. She knows I wouldn't let you go easily. She sent this to extort us. She wants hush money. She wants a guarantee for that baby. I turned back to face him. You created a monster, Arthur. And now it's hungry. Arthur looked at me with red, wet eyes. What do we do? Help me, Claire. I don't want to be with her. I don't want this kid ruining my life. Once again, only thinking of himself. He didn't care about the unborn child. He only cared about his comfort. How wildly selfish this man was, and how foolish I was to ever trust him with half my life. You want me to fix this? I asked. Arthur nodded desperately. Yes, please fix it. I'll do anything. I walked back to the table and slid the thick legal folder from Daniel across the marble. Sign this. Arthur looked at the document hesitantly. What is this? It's an asset transfer agreement, I explained flatly. The Midtown apartment you used as your love nest, the minority shares in the 3 restaurant branches, the commercial real estate in your name, everything transfers back to my sole ownership, tonight. Why? He asked, completely lost. To protect you, you idiot, I barked. If Briana sues for child support or paternity claims, her lawyers will come after your assets. If those assets are in your name, she gets a piece. But if everything is transferred to me, you officially own nothing. A broke Arthur isn't worth extorting. The logic clicked in his panicked brain. His eyes lit up. He saw an escape hatch. He thought I was saving him. He didn't realize I was stripping him of his very last layer of armor. You're right, Claire. You're a genius, he muttered, grabbing a gold pen without reading the fine print, which also contained an ironclad waiver of alimony and corporate voting rights. He signed every page I pointed to. 1 signature, 2 signatures, 10 signatures. With every stroke of ink, Arthur was cutting his own safety line, surrendering the life I had given him 20 years ago. When the last page was signed, I pulled the folder away and held it tightly against my chest. My assets were safe. My empire was whole again. There was no loophole for Briana, her illegitimate child, or Arthur to steal a single cent. I checked my watch. 10 p.m. "Is it done?" Arthur asked, looking relieved as if a boulder had been lifted off his chest. "So how do we handle Briana? Do we pay her off?" I stood up and smoothed my blazer. I looked at Arthur with new eyes, the eyes I reserved for useless strangers. "We?" I asked, a thin smile forming. "There is no we in this equation, Arthur." His smile vanished. "What do you mean?" "I have secured my assets." "My job is done," I said casually. "The rest is your problem." "But you said you were going to fix the Briana situation." "I did fix it. I ensured she can't steal my money through you. That was my only concern. The fact that she is pregnant, that she is extorting you, that you have a child out of wedlock, that is your personal nightmare, Arthur. Deal with it yourself." "Claire, you can't just abandon me like this." Arthur stood up, panic setting back in. "Sit down," I said softly. "I'm not finished. I'm not." I reached into my bag and pulled out one final document, the one I had prepared long ago, but hesitated to use, the divorce papers. I tossed them onto the coffee table right on top of the ultrasound photo. "This is my final gift to you," I said. "Sign that. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, your suitcases will have already been packed. David can put them in the trunk of your car. You can sleep in a hotel tonight." "Divorce?" Arthur gasped, stumbling back. "But our agreement. The business is secure. You just signed away all your rights," I said, tapping the thick folder in my arms. "You have no leverage left, Arthur. You aren't the CEO, you own no assets, and as of tonight you are no longer my husband." "Claire, no, I have nowhere to go," he screamed hysterically. I walked toward the grand staircase, leaving him sobbing in the living room. "You have that midtown apartment," I said without looking back. "The one you played house in for 2 years. I was generous enough not to seize that one. Go there, live with Briana, raise the kid. Try being a responsible man for once in your life. Enjoy living on a budget without my Amex." I walked up the stairs, my steps light. Behind me, Arthur's wails echoed pathetically through the mansion. I felt absolutely nothing. My conscience had died a long time ago, murdered by his betrayal. Tonight I would sleep perfectly. Tomorrow I would wake up as the sole queen on a chessboard wiped clean of useless pawns. The next morning the house was utterly silent. No drama, no shouting. When I came downstairs, Arthur's bags were gone. His car was missing from the garage. He had left. Perhaps whatever shred of dignity he had left forced him out before sunrise. Or perhaps he was too terrified to face me in the daylight. On the coffee table next to the stain from his Scotch glass lay the divorce papers. He had signed them. The signature was sloppy and slightly smudged perhaps by tears or shaking hands, but it was legally binding. I picked up the papers, verified them, and handed them to Rachel, who had just arrived to pick me up. "Send this to Daniel's office immediately. Tell him to fast-track it. I don't want any leaks to page 6 before the ink is dry," I ordered. "Yes, ma'am. What about Mr. Arthur?" "He texted me asking about a severance package," Rachel asked hesitantly. I let out a sharp laugh. "Severance. Even at the end he tries to milk the cow he slaughtered. Tell him his severance is me not pressing criminal charges for embezzlement. That is incredibly generous. If he asks again, send him the invoice for the PR crisis management and the damaged crystal." "Understood." The drive into Manhattan felt entirely different today. The sky over the skyline looked sharper, clearer. The 200-pound dead weight of Arthur was gone from my shoulders. I felt lighter, deadlier. But there was one last loose end to tie. Briana. I had David pull the Maybach over near a small coffee shop across the street from the midtown luxury apartment where Arthur and Briana used to meet, the apartment that with deeply ironic cruelty I had left in Arthur's name. I didn't get out. I waited in the back seat with the tinted windows rolled up. 10 minutes later, a man in a leather jacket slipped into the passenger seat. He was the private investigator I had retained late last night. "You got the intel?" I asked from the back. The man handed me an envelope. "Full dossier, ma'am. The ultrasound is real, but there's a catch. The date is from 2 weeks ago, yes, but the doctor listed is a high-end fertility specialist. Briana didn't get pregnant by accident. She underwent hormone stimulation therapy. She planned it. She stopped taking her birth control and forced a pregnancy without Mr. Arthur's knowledge." I smiled grimly. So it wasn't an accident. It was a trap. Briana really wanted to lock down Arthur, or rather, lock down my wealth. Unfortunately for her, she was 2 steps too late. "And her background?" I asked. "She worked at 2 different nightclubs in meatpacking before getting hired at the Gilded Swan. Fired from both for stealing tips and trying to extort drunk VIPs. She has a track record, ma'am. She's a professional grifter." "Information is power," I murmured. "Do you have the audio recording?" "Got to her old roommate. The roommate said Briana used to brag every night that she was going to trap a billionaire and never work again. The audio files are on this flash drive. I took the drive. These were the final nails in their coffin. Excellent work. The rest of your fee will be wired by noon." The investigator got out, and the Maybach pulled back into the Manhattan traffic heading to corporate HQ. When I arrived, I immediately convened an emergency board meeting. There was no chair for Arthur this time. I sat at the head of the table, the sole ruler. "Colleagues," I began with a steady, commanding voice, "today we turn a new page. Arthur is no longer with the company due to personal health reasons. All operational and strategic authority has returned entirely to me." The directors exchanged glances, but no one dared ask a question. To ask was to challenge, and to challenge was corporate suicide. Our focus is rebranding. We are wiping the slate clean of the previous weak leadership. We are returning to our roots: quality, absolute discipline, and profitability. "Are there any questions?" "No, Mrs. Clare," they answered in unison. That afternoon, I sat in my corner office looking out at the sprawling city. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Thanks for kicking Arthur out. Now he's all mine. We're going to be so happy with our baby. You're going to die alone on a pile of money, you old witch. Briana." I read the text without a flinch. She was trying to hurt me, trying to prove she had won the prize. She didn't understand. She thought she had won the jackpot, not realizing she had just picked up the trash I threw out. I typed a brief reply, my final interaction with either of them. "Enjoy. Just a heads up, Arthur signed away all his assets to me last night. That Midtown apartment you're sitting in is the only thing he owns, and the mortgage is $10,000 a month. It's due on the 1st. Arthur is unemployed, cut off from my accounts, and your name is blacklisted from the entire NYC hospitality industry. I hope your love is strong enough to pay the electric bill and buy diapers. Good luck." I hit send. Within seconds, the status changed to read. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. She was panicking. She finally realized she had won a bankrupt man. She had trapped herself in poverty with a spoiled, middle-aged ex-CEO who had no idea how to actually work for a living. I blocked the number. I blocked Arthur's number. I closed the book on both of them forever. I walked over to the climate-controlled wine fridge in the corner of my office. I pulled out a bottle of Chateau Margaux, infinitely more expensive and elegant than the Merlot Briana had spilled. I poured a measure into a crystal glass, swirled it perfectly, and inhaled the rich, complex aroma. A knock on the door. Rachel walked in with a new stack of reports. "Mrs. Clare, our stock price jumped 5% following the announcement of the management restructuring." I smiled. "The market loves power." "Yeah," I smiled. The market loves certainty." "Excellent," I said. "Have the car ready. I want to have dinner at the Gilded Swan tonight. I want to ensure my new standards are being upheld." "Alone, ma'am?" Rachel asked hesitantly. I took a sip of the Margaux. The warm, dark liquid slid down my throat. It tasted like absolute victory. "Yes, Rachel. Alone," I said firmly. "It is better to dine alone at the Queen's table than to eat with traitors in a pigsty." I turned back to the window, staring at my reflection overlaid against the glittering Manhattan skyline. Clare, 45, self-made billionaire. They say it's lonely at the top. They are right. But at least the view is spectacular. And no one will ever dare spill wine on my silk blouse again. I raised my glass to my reflection.